of the Scaling Your Business podcast. For this episode, delighted to be joined by Cormac Reid, the founder and CEO at ROCTEL. Cormac, you're very welcome to the show.
Thanks, Rian. Nice to be here. Thanks for asking me.
It's great to have you. Typical fashion of the show, Cormac, we start with early influences. So where you grew up. I know that you went to school in Blackrock. Going to assume that you grew up in Dublin. Correct me if I'm wrong, but kind of tell me what your early years were like. Any favorite hobbies, standout memories?
Yeah, well, I grew up in South Dublin, Monkstown, which isn't too far from Blackrock. Nice, leafy seaside suburb. So it was all. I suppose the formative years were the 80s. It was for me just a lot of crack, a lot of fun. Sports wise, played a lot of tennis in the tennis club more than I was probably anywhere else. Interesting, my parents put me in the tennis club out in Lansdowne, which I had to cycle to. So that kept me fit, having to go out to that every day, pretty much in my teen years. But yeah, and obviously went to school locally there in Blackrock.
Interesting. I've been to Monkstown a couple of times. My grandparents live in Kilkenny, but also have a house in Dublin, and we usually do Chris Kindle every year, somewhere around Monkstown. What did you want to be when you were younger? When you went, like, go back to young kind of pre-teen Cormac, what did he want to be when he grew up?
I think I was always drawn towards business in general. I was very much interested. I have very early vague memories of kind of hotel and kind of that type of thing, and fancied myself involved in that in some capacity. I then got jobs in college as restaurants and bars and things, and I realized that was probably not my natural fit long term. But that end of things. But yeah, to me, it was always in business, always working on opportunities, and I was kind of did the whole kind of Christmas wreaths and trees and all that stuff in my late teens to earn a few bob, and I think that was always kind of a kindle of the entrepreneurial spirit that was there. But I think as early as late teens, talking to colleagues in school, we were always fashioning ideas that we would someday go out and do something, but needless to say, the internet didn't exist, so that wasn't on the agenda at the time. It was probably more related to other avenues, but yeah, so that was no specific. I certainly knew I didn't want to be a doctor. I wasn't big on blood and things like that, so it was going to be business for sure.
And when you mentioned all the kind of side hustles that you had, is there anyone influential in your life that you look to that you think influenced that? A teacher, a close relative, a parent?
Well, I knew my grandfather, who passed when I was in my teens, but he would have been a businessman back in the day. And, I suppose listening to the stories from him and seeing him interacting with my own father was certainly interesting. I had uncles who were in business, and I got a sense that it was always interesting to look at going down that path. My own father was successful in a corporate world, more kind of a corporate orientated person, but also kind of a sports was his big thing. So he was just always about the sport, and that was his main thing as a kid growing up. So there was no sitting around really tolerated. You're out either kicking a ball or hitting it or doing something, and that was basically the education that I got there. But yeah, I think on my mum's side, there was always encouragement, if you like, that you can always beat your own path and go after something if you really want it. It's all about passion, things like that. So
tell me then, I know that after secondary school, you went and studied accountancy and business. Why did you choose those two topics?
Well, basically, that was my parents put me down the path of business because they were very, very interested in that, and it was not something that I was completely going, oh, I definitely want to do accountancy. I really need to count numbers or what have you. But I knew it was a foundational to all business. So no harm in understanding and reading a set of accounts and understanding the difference between, liabilities and debts and things like that, So yeah, my father was very much an advocate for that. I was actually interested in the arts, believe it or not. That was really something I wanted to pursue. When I think back now that you're asking the question, I mean, I was very interested in painting and all that side of things. But I had good friends who were experts, and I wasn't at that standard. So I kind of realized that there was no, Leonardo da Vinci in me, really. It was more just kind of an idea. And my father was obviously pushing me the business route, so that's what came about. And I suppose in school there was those vague memories of those guidance counselors who'd kind of say, well, look, and they were actually putting me down the engineering path, and it was interesting to have that identified at an early age, but yet business was very much the family agenda. Ironically, now I work with engineers all around me, and it's probably quite a comfortable space for me.
I'd like to, before we get into anything to do with Rocktel, to rewind to the year 1993, after you left studying accountancy and business, or you finished it. You landed a sales role at a company I believe was called Reflex. The question here is, you spent over a year in sales. What was it like? What lessons did you take from it? And do you think others should gather, other future CEOs and entrepreneurs should gather a year in sales before they go into the role?
Yeah, I mean, sales is probably a grandiose title. It was really ground level start. Reflex was a PLC at the time. It was an IBM house. I didn't at that stage really know even what IBM was, if I'm honest. It was really early doors. Walked into a building in Sandyford, and a bunch of people doing something with computing. I really didn't know very much. So I was told to go into the warehouse, put on a white coat. I was in my suit. I said, what's the white coat for? This is a bunch of boxes over there. They need to be over here. So, wow. So I was there going, okay. And you got to remember, back in '93, it was 17% unemployment. A lot of my friends were still going to the UK, to the US. I was very fortunate to kind of get an opportunity to start in that company. I think once they met me very quickly, within a handful of weeks, they said, do you want to get into sales support, the background of that type of thing, which ultimately meant a thing called the Compass Directory, which some of people my vintage would know about, this big, thick book that you were given. And there was no training, there was none of that. It was a phone, there was a book, and you either did something with that or you didn't. And if you didn't, you were gone. And at 17% unemployment, that was a real challenge. That was very much a very, very challenge. So it was a real kind of high octane sales environment that I was at the very junior. I was only a young fella, and you had to kind of fight for your place, as it were. So I was high energy. I was up for it, and moved very quickly into the services end of things, as in maintenance and large accounts, working with like CRH and people like that. And it was very much, they were in the enterprise space. So I got a sense of what these big organizations needed infrastructure and computing for, and what the whole business model was. I was very much turning that around. And there was a very senior business owner involved in that. Kilduff was his name, and he was very, Tony Kilduff, very successful businessman. And I suppose even as a young fellow, he wouldn't know who I was, but I knew who he was. and I was keeping an eye on what he was up to. And I liked the way he kind of was coming in and making things happen.
Mm. I'm not going to go through each one of your roles, but the next role you had after Reflex was just over 5.5 years at DSS.
Yes.
You finished up there as a communications business manager. So in those almost 6 years, you've obviously gained a lot of experience and carried some of those lessons from Reflex as well. I'm assuming from your title that you both managed people and helped grow the business. So when you look back to that time, are there perhaps one or two skills or behaviors that you got the chance to improve while there that you've carried with you to now being the CEO of Rocktel?
Yeah, I mean, that company, DSS, they call themselves Codec now. They're an established company doing very well. But when I was there, gosh, a long time ago now, what I got from there was, again, just another opportunity to develop skills around sales and account management, dealing with enterprise corporations, that type of thing. And I suppose when I was at that stage, I wrote a business plan for them around this whole idea of selling services around the internet. And at that stage, believe it or not, that wasn't even a consideration for them. And there was a great CEO of the time, Tony Stafford was his name, very, very hard-nosed businessman, very good at what he did and very admirable character. And he just looked at me and says, if it makes sense, we'll back you. So I had to do the full, there's my accountancy training came in. I was able to put a nice business plan together, stress tested and all the analysis that goes with it. And he backed it and off we went. And it opened up a whole new area for me as an individual about the whole telecommunications area, because it really was pivotal that infrastructure was one thing, but telco was another, and you needed to bridge those gaps, how you could deliver services. So at those formative years in my late 20s, it was a great opportunity. And yes, got to hire some very, very key people and manage a team. And it was, all of those skills were brought to bear and ultimately developed. They were very good in that they identified myself and another colleague. We went on a Harvard business program. They flew in some people from the States, and it was like a 6 to 8 week program around business management. And that professor literally blew our minds within 10 minutes of meeting him. And I think those opportunities are somewhat happen chance if you get people like that who come into your life, and then you get the opportunities are really kind of flattened out for you. And that was very much formative years, but gave me a real belief of potentially going to the next step of going out and doing some business.
Now you're the CEO of Rocktel. Rather than me kind of give the 30-second commercial, you'll do a much better job because it's your business. So the mic is yours.
Yeah, thanks, Rian. Well, Rocktel, we're 20 years in business. We spun out of our consulting business when we first started out. We service mid-market multinationals, our sweet spot, companies around every county of Ireland, many countries in the world. We've connected and managed customers. Most of our clients would be large to mid-sized multinational and Cisco technologies, infrastructural related top projects, carrier services from multiple vendors, so we're carrier neutral. And ultimately we solve problems for companies that are requiring to have their whole digitization improved, that whole transformation that people speak of, where the business is now in the cloud, the buildings are probably getting smaller, and Rocktel facilitate connecting all of that and bringing the workforce into that whole domain as well, wherever they may be.
Sticking with your role as the CEO, I noticed that you're celebrating 21 years in business this year, so congrats on that. As you look at other CEOs who are probably in a lot of strategy meetings at the moment for next year and beyond, and you look back at all those years that you've had a business, what are some of the blind spots that you've got to be aware of as you build a business? Not having a common language, not building a bench, not focusing on lead generation. What are some of the things that you think can hold back a business?
Interesting question. I mean, there's so many things that can hold back a business. I think the one thing is you can never be complacent, even if you get to a stage where you become, everybody is a startup at some point, whether you're funded or not. And then you get to a stage, you get a bit of traction and you're building. The key is definitely not to get complacent. From the point of view as well, the other thing is your customers are ultimately king and you've got to look after them. I know that sounds cliche, but that's very important. I think having been 21 years, obviously we had a very nice time of being at the very beginning of the tiger economy. And we felt that we had knocked it out of the park and we were having a great time. And then the crash came. And having to weather that storm was a real eye-opener, having to come through that. And I think then, we came through that and coming out, and then pandemic hits. And you're kind of going, okay, you couldn't write this stuff. We only got a handful of years before we had to deal with another type of crisis. And notwithstanding the entire infrastructural technology change from analog to digital to cloud-based services is also massive infrastructural change for the customer, but equally for service providers to be able to pivot and manage that. So very specific to our business, I think that one of the key things that we all have to look out for is how we are actually delivering services and solving the problems that the customers have, not just today, but 3 to 5 years down the road, making sure they're match fit as their businesses need to either compress or expand depending on the type of organization. one thing we've learned over the last 2 years with the pandemic is we've had most of our customers accelerate. We're very lucky. But we've also had some contract. We've had to work with them and basically facilitate dialing down services and obviously spinning up other services for other clients. I think that flexibility has really helped us build very strong rapport and relations with our clients. And I think going forward, as you mentioned, I think at the top of this was all around the digitization, if you like, of the communication from podcasting to your social networks. All of that is becoming, we all know this, very, very important. And I think that the pandemic has really emphasized for companies that are 21 years old, we've had to come from a legacy position, if you like, now to adopt to that. So we're very much going through that ourselves and, you know, enjoying that process. But I think you just need to be true to who the business is, stick to what you're very good at, develop your services around you know, very strong service ethos and go from there.
When you look forward at growing the business and continuing to achieve that growth, let's say over the next 12 to 18 months, what are some of the things that I imagine referrals are a big part of landing net new accounts for you, having been in business for 21 years. But what are some of the things that you're focused on to achieve that continued growth over the next 12 to 18 months?
Well, we're now very much doing a lot of outbound marketing is a big part of it. As I mentioned, we've taken in some marketing people who are literally looking at Rocktel going, this is like a well-kept secret in some respects. So we're ultimately getting ready to push out in a full digital strategy around that, which is exciting. And I'm literally just going, do your magic, marketeers, because it's more of their sweet spot than my own. And I think in order to achieve that growth, yes, we do get a lot of referral. We do have, I think the figure some years back was like 47% of people who came in through Rocktel were referred into us, which is significant. Now that was going way back, but I mean, it is very much the type of customers we deal with. We've got customers who employ hundreds and hundreds of people. They're we're deeply entrenched in what they're doing, what they need. And I think they also have an ecosystem of people they deal with and their peers. And if we're solving problems for them, they often just say, look, if you're going through it, you need to pick up the phone to Cormac and his team. So it certainly has helped. But yeah, for the next 18 months, it's all about the outbound marketing, growing the brand, raising the awareness. And that's a big part of what we're doing.
Is there a tool that you use daily that you can't live without?
I suppose there's so many. I've got a lovely little phone, as we all do, these smartphones with our little boxes of apps that I call a Rocktel work. And in there's probably about 9 apps, from HubSpot to Microsoft to WebEx to, you know, you name it. And there's a bunch of them there that are critical to the delivery. And what I love is the fact that we can now see every single node on our networks, which has spanned literally from North America to Russia. And I can see them on my phone and see red or green lights. And we like to see green lights. So, you know, but it gives us a very, very close to the pulse of what's happening. And all of that's on the mobile phone, which is incredible, really. And yeah, so which one would couldn't live without? I suppose it'd be hard to single one out in particular, but you know, the overall finance apps, the commercial apps, the CRM apps, all of them.
You mentioned phone. I'm a bit of a gadget freak, and I like to get random gadgets as well that people never expect. The other week, I bought the world's smallest phone.
No way, I've seen one of those. I've never seen one in real life, but I've seen them about. Yeah, very cool.
Absolutely tiny. It's about the size of my thumb for anyone who's smaller than my thumb for anyone who.
And does it work well?
Yeah, it does. I've dialed a number on it, and it's very clear, and you can text as well on it. I'll put a link in the description for anyone who's listening to this.
Yeah, do. It's interesting. The Nokia, I think it's called the 6110 or whichever phone it was. It was a bulletproof phone of, you know, back in the day, that they've re-released it, and people who don't want all the apps. They just want to be able to phone and text, and it's somewhat popular. Personally, I have to say I get the news. I do everything that everybody else does on their smartphones. It'd be hard to go back to a Nokia 6110 for me, but I can see where some people like it.
With you on that. This question usually gets people to think for a minute or two, so I'll just throw it out there and see what happens.
Okay.
What's your personal definition of success?
That's a good question. I mean, I suppose if we all look at ourselves as layered, multi-layered, you know, there's for me, obviously family is really important. My own immediate family, my kids, my wife, and interest. My kids are at school away, and they came back, and we were watching Survivor Australia on TG Car. I don't know if you've seen it. It's a great TV show. And we were all there, whatever, 11, and my 16-year-old was even there. And we're all together. I sat back, and I kind of felt, as everybody was roaring at the TV over something, that for me, that's success. That's a nice family day that we don't get all the time, and it was fun. And then from a commercial perspective, I'm in a position now, 21 years on, where you build up a business. You know, we're very, you know, in good place, and we're plenty of contracts running out for many years. So we're in a position now where we're able to look and see what's next for us, and I'm really enjoying this time of evolution in the business. So for me, that's a success point, to be able to have that, as I sometimes say, enjoy the pause. If you do get a chance, just go, okay, now we're in November, from now to the end of the year, it's all about thinking for next year. And let's just say when 2010, 2011, you'd asked the same question, I wouldn't have had that time to pause. It was a firefight. So I think the opportunity to have that is success in itself. And you can have nice things and nice bits and bobs, and that's all lovely, but the reality is, it's health is your wealth, and your family, for sure.
How important do you think relationships are in business?
Well, business relationships are very important. I think in some ways the pandemic has changed the kind of the four ball, the golf. I sail, I go out, and that's one of my main sports, and it's this great camaraderie there. But the days of kind of, using that for pure, sports for relationships, I think it's as you say, it's about building rapport with people over time. As I would have customers for 15 years, being available. So yeah, it's super important, but it's changed in the last 18 months. We don't get to go out and have a coffee and have a chat and go for dinner like we would have done. I'm looking forward to that returning, but it is very important, for sure.
Final question for you, Cormac. If you were the final decision maker in adding a mandatory subject to the secondary school curriculum, what would it be and why?
Well, that's an interesting one. I suppose mandatory. There's a couple of things you shouldn't come out of school without. One of them is knowing CPR. Another one is knowing how to swim at least 100 meters. And they're kind of on the physical level. And then from a business perspective, I think everybody should learn emotional intelligence. I had the privilege of doing a technology spin out at one of the universities dealing with very, academic orientated people, which is great. But I did get a sense that sometimes there's a gap there in the skills knowledge for some people, that communication is going to become more important than ever before. So, and I'm not talking about communication as in tools, as in technology, I'm talking about individuals, because that skill is being diluted by the apps, the phones, the headsets, the head down, the hoodie up, and those skills are being lost. So I think the schools need to bring in literally a human communication as part of a syllabus, perhaps potentially, which would center around emotional intelligence, building rapport, doing all of these skills that are critical, because I think they're going to become a lost art if we're not careful. But particularly for some academics and people who are potentially less, I suppose, extrovert or able to talk in front of people, these skills need to be given to everybody at a basic level. So when they all come out, they're match fit. And many founders are technical people, and the one drawback they have is communication, which is key.
Cormac Reid, founder and CEO of Rocktel. It's been a pleasure having you on the podcast. I will leave links to both your personal LinkedIn account and your company page. If there's any other links you'd like me to include, just drop me a message. But for today, thanks for being my guest, and I wish you continued success.
Listen, Rian, thanks very much. Enjoyed it. All the best for your podcast, and talk to you again. Take care.